In the bosom of a family of Italian immigrants, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, on December 17, 1936. He was the firstborn of 5 children of Mario José Bergoglio, a railway accountant, and Regina Maria Sivori, a devout and pious homemaker. From childhood, Jorge displayed a peculiar sensitivity to human affairs, marked by a discreet yet intense spirituality. His mother taught him his first prayers and introduced him to the Catholic faith with tenderness and firmness. Times were difficult in Argentina during the 1930s and 40s, but the Bergoglio family's faith was unshakable. Amid poverty and social challenges grew the boy who would one day be the vicar of Christ on earth. In adolescence, Jorge experienced moments of discernment that marked him deeply. During a severe bout of pneumonia, he felt God's call intimately and promised to dedicate himself entirely to the Lord's service. He studied chemical technology, but soon abandoned that career when he felt an inner impulse toward religious life. At 21, he entered the novitiate of the Society of Jesus, becoming a Jesuit in 1958 under the motto Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam. The Jesuit formation years were intense and rigorous. He studied philosophy and theology, always with intellectual brilliance and striking humility. He was admired for his discipline and closeness to the poor and marginalized. On December 13, 1969, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was ordained a priest by Bishop Ramon José Castellano. In that moment, a definitive alliance was sealed between the young Jesuit and the apostolic mission of the Church. In the following years, he performed various academic and pastoral roles, including novice master and rector of the Colegio Maximo in San Miguel. His leadership was firm, yet always marked by listening, prayer, and discernment. The 1970s brought turbulence to Argentina as the military dictatorship spread fear and death. Bergoglio, prudent and silent, protected many persecuted people, offering refuge and aid in secret, moved by Christian charity. In 1973, he was appointed provincial of the Jesuits in Argentina at just 36. In that mission, he faced internal and external tensions, always seeking fidelity to the society's mission and care for his brothers. After years of mission and silence, he was appointed Auxiliary Bishop of Buenos Aires in 1992 by Pope John Paul II. He accepted with humility, refusing honors and choosing to live with evangelical simplicity. He became coadjutor Archbishop in 1997, and after Cardinal Quaracino's death, assumed as Archbishop of Buenos Aires in 1998. His first decision, to live in a small apartment, cook for himself, and take public transportation. In the Argentine capital, Cardinal Bergoglio was a constant presence in the outskirts, slums, and hospitals. The poor called him Father Jorge, and he listened to them attentively and treated them with profound dignity. In 2001, he was created cardinal by St. John Paul II. Upon receiving the red biretta, he refused the traditional celebration and asked that the money be given to the poor. This gesture summarized his incarnate spirituality. He took part in the 2005 conclave that elected Benedict XVI. Although considered papabile, he remained silent amid speculations, preferring discretion and prayer to protagonism. Throughout the 2000s, he strengthened social ministry in Argentina, founded seminaries, encouraged vocations, and promoted a clergy close to the people, poor in style and rich in mercy. He was known for celebrating masses in humble homes, prisons, and rehabilitation centers. He preached with accessible words and concrete gestures. His language was the gospel lived with bare feet on the streets. In 2013, after Benedict XVI's historic resignation, Jorge Mario Bergoglio went to Rome for the conclave carrying only a small suitcase and a heart surrendered to God's will. On March 13, 2013, after 5 ballots, he was elected the 266th Pope of the Church. He chose the name Francis in honor of the poor man of Assisi, signaling the centrality of the poor and of peace in his pontificate. When he appeared on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, the crowd saw a man who, before blessing, asked for the people's blessing. The gesture moved the world and revealed the new Pope's spirit. Pope Francis's pontificate soon became marked by a strong emphasis on mercy, simplicity of life, and care for the excluded. His first trip outside Rome was to the island of Lampedusa, where he wept for migrants who had died at sea. He reformed the Roman Curia, fought financial scandals, and instituted measures for greater transparency. He created the Council of Cardinals and promoted a more synodal church where everyone could be heard. In 2015, he issued the encyclical Laudato Si' on care for our common home. He called the world to integral ecology, denouncing environmental destruction as a sin against the poor and against God. At World Youth Day in Rio de Janeiro in 2013, he captivated millions of young people with his closeness and spontaneity. "Go without fear to serve," he exhorted, with the authority of one who lives what he preaches. In every gesture, Pope Francis embodied the tenderness of the Good Shepherd. He touched lepers, embraced children, phoned strangers, and repeated, "Mercy is God's name." The world was witnessing a new spiritual springtime. At the center of his pontificate, Pope Francis placed preferential love for the poor. Following Jesus' example, he insisted that the church must be like a field hospital, welcoming life's wounded. He visited countless countries marked by conflict, poverty, or tragedy, bringing a message of peace and reconciliation. In Myanmar in 2017, he defended the rights of the Rohingya minority with courage and compassion. He also visited refugee camps in the Middle East, war-torn Africa, and Latin America oppressed by injustice. In every place, he knelt before suffering and called the world to greater solidarity. In 2016, he proclaimed the Jubilee Year of Mercy, opening holy doors around the world, including in prisons and hospitals. It was a time of conversion, confession, and rediscovery of God's unconditional love. His most recurring teaching was mercy. He said no sin is greater than God's grace. He encouraged priests to welcome, listen, and forgive with tenderness and without harsh judgments. Pope Francis did not shy away from thorny issues. He spoke about abuse in the church with firmness and sorrow, meeting personally with victims, asking forgiveness in the church's name, and implementing strict disciplinary reforms. With his simple and direct style, he challenged clergy to abandon clericalism and seek a life closer to the people. "A shepherd must smell like his sheep," he said, demanding authenticity in ministry. He reformed the marriage nullity process, making access to justice and truth easier for many faithful. He promoted listening to and integrating the divorced and remarried in church life, always with pastoral discernment. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, he was a voice of hope and consolation. The world was moved by his solitary Urbi et Orbi blessing in an empty, rain-soaked St. Peter's Square before the Blessed Sacrament. He published key encyclicals such as Fratelli Tutti on fraternity and social friendship, and Evangelii Gaudium, a true missionary program urging the Church to go out to meet everyone, especially the forgotten. In his weekly audiences, he spoke with words both simple and profound. He used stories, gestures, and smiles to touch hearts. He made theology accessible without losing doctrinal richness or spiritual depth. He gave voice to the world's peripheries, elevating cardinals from countries previously invisible in the College of Cardinals. He wanted a church that breathes with both lungs, west and east, north and south. He encouraged interreligious dialogue through historic gestures such as meeting the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar and Jewish and Buddhist leaders. He sought to build bridges where walls of distrust had stood. He promoted synodality as a path for the whole Church. He convened synods on the Amazon, on youth, and later the Great Synod on synodality, proposing mutual listening that renews communion. In his spirituality, Pope Francis was deeply Marian. He prayed the Rosary daily, trusted in Our Lady Undoer of Knots, and placed every apostolic journey under the Virgin Mary's mantle. He also cultivated a special devotion to Saint Joseph, the Church's protector. He proclaimed the year of St. Joseph and wrote the apostolic letter, Patris Corde, meditating on the sainted carpenter's tenderness and strength. Regarding youth, he convened memorable World Youth Days. In Panama, Lisbon, and Rio, he spoke boldly to young people, calling them to make noise, to refuse resignation, and to follow Christ courageously. His meetings with the elderly, prisoners, migrants, and people with disabilities were moments of grace. He listened to them as friends, paid attention to the forgotten, and said that no one is useless in God's eyes. His personal life was marked by discipline and austerity. He rose at 4:30 a.m., prayed at length, read the Gospels, and carried out his tasks simply, without luxuries or excessive protocol. The Casa Santa Marta was his home as Pope. He declined the traditional papal apartments and preferred to live among other priests and religious, dining in the common refectory and using elevators like anyone else. In his apostolic exhortations and speeches, Pope Francis often used images from everyday life to illustrate gospel truths. He spoke of grandparents, tenderness, worn-out shoes, simple families, and humble workers. His attention to Catholic social teaching was constant. He defended decent work, just wages, tax justice, and the dignity of every human being. He denounced the throwaway culture with evangelical vigor. Behind the scenes, he was known for his remarkable memory, capacity for listening, and refined sense of humor. He joked with children, answered letters from the faithful, and made surprise phone calls that moved many worldwide. In his later years, he faced health difficulties with patience and courage. Respiratory problems and surgeries limited his mobility, but not his prophetic voice or loving pastoral presence. Even physically limited, he continued presiding at celebrations, writing messages, and welcoming pilgrims. Always smiling, he said, "The joy of the gospel fills the hearts of those who encounter Jesus." The figure of Pope Francis became a symbol of hope for millions, even outside the Catholic Church. His natural charisma, united to the authenticity of his life, touched even those far from faith. In meetings with world leaders, Francis always defended human dignity, peace among peoples, and care for the most vulnerable. His words echoed in hearts with moral authority. He faced internal and external criticism with serenity and trust in God. He never answered aggressively, but with prayer, silence, and fidelity to the gospel. He was a man of peace amid storms. Over time, his legacy began to solidify. A poorer church, closer to the people, more synodal, more Samaritan. A church that goes out of itself to serve, as he asked from the start of his pontificate. His love for migrants translated into concrete actions. He created the dicastery for promoting integral human development and encouraged Catholic communities to welcome and integrate those fleeing war and hunger. A hallmark of his pontificate was the Abu Dhabi document, signed with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, promoting human fraternity and interreligious dialogue, a prophetic gesture in times of division. Francis did not limit himself to words. He visited refugee camps, washed prisoners' feet, embraced lepers and the sick. He lived in practice what he preached with his lips. He was a shepherd who smelled like his sheep. With courage, he addressed the climate crisis as a moral and spiritual imperative. He said that caring for creation is part of our faith and that ignoring the poor and the planet offends the Creator. He valued women in the life of the Church, opening new spaces for listening and leadership. He appointed women to important Vatican positions and promoted their active presence in decision-making and evangelization. His Jesuit spirituality, deeply shaped by the exercises of St. Ignatius, shone through in his way of discerning, listening, and acting. Always attentive to the Spirit, he neither ran ahead of God nor resisted his will. In the final years of his pontificate, Francis prepared the Church for a new era. He formed leaders, renewed structures, and pointed out paths of communion, mission, and co-responsibility. Upon completing 10 years as Pope in 2023, he declared, "I am a sinner, but chosen by mercy." This phrase summed up his self-view, an unworthy servant in the hands of the merciful Father. In 2024, already greatly weakened, he continued to steer the Church firmly. He took part in the Synod on Synodality, even in a wheelchair, demonstrating total dedication until his strength was spent. During Holy Week 2025, he presided over the celebrations with great effort. The world watched emotionally the witness of a shepherd who, though tired, would not abandon his sheep. In the early hours of April 21, 2025, he returned to the Father's house at the Casa Santa Marta residence. He departed in peace, as he had lived, with humility, serenity, and total abandonment to God's hands. News of his death moved the entire world. In the Vatican, the bells tolled, and millions of faithful began a spontaneous prayer vigil in gratitude for the pontiff of love and mercy. According to his wish, he was buried in the Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome, before the icon of the Virgin Salus Populi Romani, to whom he had tender devotion, a gesture sealing his love for Mary. Leaders of all religions expressed deep sorrow. Declarations of admiration came from Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, and other traditions, recognizing in him a man of God and of peace. The president of Brazil, in declaring national mourning, summed up the feelings of millions. Today, the world has lost a shepherd, a man of boundless kindness, and a tireless defender of the poor. In Africa, entire communities celebrated masses in his memory, recalling his visits and consoling words. In prisons, hospitals, and villages, candles were lit for the man who never forgot them. In Asia, faithful of all ages remembered his appeals for peace, defense of human rights, and appreciation of local cultures. Francis spoke a language that transcended barriers. In his native Argentina, crowds filled the streets with tears and songs. There, where it all began, the people repeated, "Gracias, Padre Jorge, gracias por tu vida entregada." The funeral was one of the most moving in church history. Thousands of bishops, priests, and faithful packed St. Peter's Square. The celebration was presided over by the Camerlengo, awaiting election of the new pope. During the homily, a passage from Evangelii Gaudium was read. "I prefer a church which is bruised, hurting, and dirty, because it has been out on the streets, rather than a church which is unhealthy from being confined." All wept. The church entered the sede vacante, yet already felt the living spiritual presence of Francis. His life remained a beacon for pastors and faithful, a sign of a more human and holier Christianity. After his death, testimonies of conversion inspired by his words and actions multiplied. People distant from faith returned to the church, touched by Francis's living example of charity and humility. The Holy See received thousands of letters and messages reporting graces obtained through his intercession. Many already invoked him as Saint Francis of Rome. Moved by faith in the heroic witness of his life, cardinals gathered for the conclave recalled his wisdom and discernment. Francis had prepared the ground for a more synodal church, capable of hearing the Holy Spirit through mutual listening. His magisterium remained a treasure for the church. Documents like Laudato Si, Fratelli Tutti, Amoris Laetitia, and Evangelii Gaudium continued to guide bishops, priests, religious, and laity in their evangelizing mission. In Catholic universities, scholars began studying Pope Francis's pastoral thought, seeking to understand the depth of his vision, a church poor for the poor, Samaritan, and in constant missionary outreach. In many parishes, chapels were erected in his name, and his image now appears beside great saints of history. The memory of the Pope of Mercy is rooted in the heart of God's people. In Latin America, bishops and laity recalled his deeply Latin American identity, marked by the theology of the people and by a spirituality that united faith, social justice, and popular Marian devotion. His gestures, washing the feet of Muslim immigrants, embracing lepers, dining with the poor, became icons of Christianity lived with evangelical radicalism. He was the gospel in flesh and blood. In Rome, his tomb quickly became a pilgrimage site for millions. Many reported miracles, healings, and conversions at the grave of the shepherd, who loved to the end without reserve. The young saw him as a spiritual grandfather, firm and gentle. He encouraged them to dream big, fight for a more just world, and follow Jesus unafraid of sacrifices. The poor saw him as one of their own. He said the poor have much to teach, and so he frequented their homes, listened to their stories, and defended their rights with prophetic courage. Families found in him an untiring advocate of the beauty of matrimonial vocation. He valued the joys and sorrows of daily life and offered words of comfort and practical guidance. Priests viewed him as a spiritual father. He urged them to live joyfully, without vanity or worldliness, and to be ministers of reconciliation, close to the people and attentive to God's signs. Religious men and women found in Francis a renewer of consecrated spirit. He called them to prophecy, service, fraternal communion, and evangelical radicalism, without nostalgia for the past. Elderly people found in him a fellow traveler. He valued the wisdom accumulated over time and said grandparents are the living memory of the people, an essential part of transmitting the faith. The sick and suffering saw him as a reflection of Christ's tenderness. He was not afraid to touch bodily and spiritual wounds and always asked, "Pray for me." Even after his passing, he continued to inspire political and social leaders. Francis taught that politics must be an expression of love and service to the common good. Children loved him for his sweetness and spontaneity. In his audiences, many approached without fear, and he welcomed them with smiles, blessings, and small gifts. In the final words of his spiritual testament, he wrote, "I entrust my soul to God's mercy and to Mary's intercession. May the Church always be faithful to the gospel." Many believe that in the future he will be canonized, for his life was a heroic witness of holiness in the heart of the world. A man of our time who lived as a true disciple of Christ. His message remains alive. God never tires of forgiving. We are the ones who tire of asking for forgiveness. With these words, he taught absolute trust in divine goodness. The world continues to reap the fruits of his pontificate. A more welcoming church, a more sensitive clergy, a more engaged youth, and a faith more deeply rooted in God's merciful love. Francis became a milestone in church history, like John XXIII or John Paul II, a pope who reformed by example, governed gently, and evangelized with the joy of the risen one. And so, amid prayers, smiles, pains, and hopes, Pope Francis wrote his name in the Book of Saints not with human glory, but with the simplicity of one who followed Christ's footsteps to the end. May his memory be eternal, and may his life continue to inspire generations to seek holiness. Pope Francis, humble servant of the Lord, pray for us.